Is PlayStation about to make another huge acquisition? And man, do we need a Pro controller for the PS5? We're gonna talk about those two news stories plus 3 more here on today's episode of PlayStation News. And guys, even though E3 is canceled, it looks like we're gonna have a pretty big summer of game announcements thanks to Summer Games Fest and all of the different publisher streams that are allegedly going to happen. So if you wanna keep up to date on all of it, make sure you're subscribed to the channel here and have your notifications set to all. Ever since Sony bought Bungie and Jim Ryan said that the acquisitions are not over for PlayStation, people have been speculating left and right about what studio PlayStation could be buying. The first big guess was From Software. I just talked about that with my friend Ray here on the channel last week, so if you missed that, make sure you check that video out. There's a lot of reasons why, but we ultimately came down on the fact that From Software probably isn't for sale at this point with how big Elden Ring is and the fact that they have a parent company. Things really came to a head over the weekend when the PlayStation Studios website added a new banner to its background that had Death Stranding behind the PlayStation Studios logo. So people kind of put 2 and 2 together. Is Sony teasing that they're going to buy Kojima Productions? This kind of went on for a few hours and there was a ton of speculation on Twitter. I saw it when I was on bed scrolling on my phone, and then we got the news from Hideo Kojima that no, that studio is staying independent, which honestly, when I saw the news, I kind of knew that was going to be the case because allegedly he's working on some sort of exclusive Xbox game with Microsoft, which, you know, kind of sucks for us PlayStation users, but it would have been sweet to see Kojima Productions get bought up by PlayStation. It would have been the reverse of Microsoft buying ZeniMax Media, Bethesda Game Studios' parent company. But the rumors are still there, and according to big industry insiders like Greg Miller and Jeff Grubb, the next acquisition Sony is going to make is going to be massive. And honestly, I have no idea what it could be. You know, there's Capcom, they would be a great purchase for Sony. There's also Konami, which I already mentioned. Sony would get some great IP that are tied to PlayStation out of that deal, like Castlevania, Silent Hill, Metal Gear Solid. Like, that would be an awesome acquisition because everyone kind of already pairs them together in their head anyway. And then on my not so much wanted list is Ubisoft. I know that they have a ton of IP that could be mined by Sony, like Assassin's Creed, Splinter Cell, Ghost Recon. The list really goes on and on there, but I just feel like they've diluted their brand so much at this point by really focusing on just cookie cutter, copy and paste open world games and battle royales for some reason, even though they've never had a success in that subgenre. The only other reason I think this could be Ubisoft is because the insiders are using the word massive, and this is a reach before I even say it. Massive is a company that Ubisoft owns, the developers of the Division games and the new Avatar game. They're also working on a Star Wars game. So these insiders using the word massive to describe PlayStation's next acquisition, you can kind of see the connection there, but then again, Ubisoft just partnered up with Microsoft to add more games to Game Pass, so you never know. Square Enix would be another good option for Sony because again, they have a ton of IP that's just associated with PlayStation. Look at Final Fantasy 16, that's going to be a PlayStation exclusive. Final Fantasy 7 Remake is still exclusive to PlayStation and there's a part 2 coming. They also have Tomb Raider. Everyone associates Tomb Raider with the first PlayStation all the way up. Remember how mad people were when Microsoft bought exclusivity on that second Tomb Raider reboot game? You know what I mean? So yeah, Square Enix would be a great pick for Sony, and it would be awesome because Square Enix can't stop talking about doing play to earn games and NFT games. So if Sony came in, bought all this IP and just made sure the games were actually finished before they came out, it'd be like a win-win for Sony. Anyway, I guess just let me know down in the comments who you think Sony is going to buy. Another big news story that happened over the weekend that you probably saw is that Boston Logan International Airport had to be evacuated because a guy brought a crusty PlayStation console through the X-ray machine, and it seems like the TSA thought it was something, I'm not gonna say it because I probably get demonetized, but it was a thing that blows up. Now, unfortunately, every news story about this doesn't actually show this PlayStation, and when these stories started breaking initially, a lot of people just assumed it was a PS5, but I don't know what you would have to put a PS5 through to make it crusty. I mean, the console's only been out around 1.5 years, and getting that weird gamer grease all over it and then having it harden into a firm little crust, I don't think that would happen in around a year and a half. It had to be something like a PS1, maybe a PS2, hey, it could have even been a PSP, but I feel like PS3, PS4, PS Vita, PS5, there just hasn't been enough time for those consoles to accumulate crust, or at least enough crust for the TSA to not understand that it was a PlayStation when you roll it through the X-ray. I don't know why, but when I think of a crusty PlayStation, what I visualize is the texture of that weird monster from the end section of Resident Evil 4. Because if you remember fighting them before you had that thermal scope, if you shot them anywhere else, you could knock them down for sure, but they would get back up and just regenerate whatever limb you blew off. That weird spiky bubbly texture that they had, that's what I'm imagining was encasing this PS1 or whatever console it was. But yeah, if you're the guy who brought this thing through the X-ray, I got a couple questions. First of all, did you get it back? And second of all, can you just tweet a picture or something? You can tag me at StayPSReady. I would just love to see what this thing looks like. The third story I have for you today is definitely my favorite of the bunch. I am extremely biased in this scenario though, but I'm just super stoked that the new game Amy Hennig has been working on at her new studio over at Skydance is officially going to be a Star Wars game. If you don't know who Amy Hennig is, she's basically the person who put the Uncharted series on the map over at Naughty Dog. She worked on the first 3 Uncharted games. She was the lead writer on those. She got started on Uncharted 4 and then something happened where she had to leave the studio and then Neil Druckmann had to take over on Uncharted 4, which was crazy that the game turned out as well as it did because I never thought it would really turn out well without her. After she left Naughty Dog, she went over to Visceral, the EA studio that made Dead Space, Dead Space 2, Dead Space 3, and then she was working on a new Star Wars game that was going to be a third-person action game, and we actually got to see like one small snippet of footage from it at one E3. And then after they decided to turn it into a live service game and realized that didn't work, EA canceled the game and closed down Visceral because EA is the worst. And then after that, she stayed quiet for a little bit, and it was announced that she went over to Skydance to start a new studio, and that is where she's working on this Star Wars game, which will probably be an Uncharted style Star Wars game. Now guys, I gotta take you back for what I hope this game is. Way back when I was in high school, there was this game that was being leaked and talked about all the time called Star Wars 1313. It was going to take place in the lowest levels of Coruscant, at the 13th level of Coruscant. It's where it gets super seedy and grungy, and that's where all the bounty hunters hang out. There was actually gameplay shown, and then when Disney bought Star Wars, or Lucasfilm as a whole, they canceled the game, and after that, we found out that it was basically going to be a Boba Fett game where you played as young Boba Fett, like a teenage Boba Fett, constructing his Mandalorian armor suit, like reacquiring his dad's armor, and also flying around in the Slave One. And it was going to be in the Uncharted style. Now, like I mentioned, that game was canceled, but over the years, there's been some footage leaking out, and even though it's really old at this point, it still looks really, really good. And knowing Amy Hennig's pedigree, I just want her to revive this game. I want to see that young Boba Fett story that we haven't seen between Clone Wars and what happens to him in the original trilogy. They could really kind of fix some of the mistakes they made in the Book of Boba Fett and give us that cool, badass bounty hunter we all know he is. Either way, the bummer here is that she's starting over from scratch, so we're gonna have to wait a while to see whatever she's working on, but she's been working on it for a little bit, so hopefully we won't have to wait too long. Guys, it only took a year, but we finally updated the PSReady merch store. Of course, there's the classic My DualSense is Tingling design. We also have an Elden Ring inspired shirt that says Maidenless on it. And then finally is the shirt I'm wearing, the PSReady Doom Eternal crossover shirt, which was a lot better of an idea in my head before Microsoft bought Bethesda and thus made the Doom franchise Xbox exclusive going forward. But Doom is a classic game, it's a classic design, and I think it looks pretty cool on a t-shirt. If you want to pick up any of the designs, they're in the merch shelf. They're also at staypsready.com, and if you use the code STAYREADY at checkout, you'll get 10% off. So now that Horizon Forbidden West and Gran Turismo 7 are out the door, Sony's release schedule for the rest of the year is looking a little light. I mean, all we really have on the AAA front that's announced right now to look forward to is God of War Ragnarok. But thankfully, an animator at PlayStation Visual Arts, which is a studio I honestly didn't know existed until I saw this news story, God of War Ragnarok is not the last big PlayStation Studios game we're getting this year, and that there's going to be bangers coming after, specifically a game being worked on by this mystery studio that's been in development for 3 to 5 years. Now, I did some digging to figure out what PlayStation Visual Arts is working on, and it turns out they're the studio that's allegedly behind this Last of Us remake that we're going to get by the end of this year. And I gotta be real, when this remake was leaked, I wasn't super excited for it because I actually play The Last of Us Part 1 every year around Halloween. It's one of my favorite games of all time, but this past year in 2021, that was the first time I played it and really started to see it showing its age a little bit. Like, Joel just feels a little too locked to the ground. Some of the textures look flat. I know specifically one part that always stands out to me as looking a little rough is when you're over in Bill's town towards the beginning of the game and you're walking down that path leading up to his town with the overgrown foliage on either side of the path. You can just kind of see where the actual graphics stop. Like, you can see the fully rendered 3D trees and bushes on either side of you, and then just a little bit past them, you can just see that there's PNGs there working as backdrops. Obviously, when you're playing on the PS3 in 720p, it looked a lot better. It was hidden a little better, but when you're playing in 4K on a PS5, it is very noticeable. So yeah, this studio is taking the engine that The Last of Us Part 2 was built on and taking all of that new combat stuff, all of the new graphics, that 60 frames per second mode, and they're rebuilding The Last of Us Part 1 in it. I think this is going to be a pretty damn solid remake. As long as they don't change anything. That is the only thing that would make me really nervous about this remake, but we also know that Naughty Dog is working on a multiplayer game for The Last of Us Part 2. It's supposedly like Escape from Tarkov Lite, which sounds awesome. I'd love to see that packaged in with this Last of Us remake. Then Sony can kind of bill it as a full price game to close out the year on the PS5, and I can't think of them doing it much better than by redeeming the fan hate for the Last of Us franchise that happened after the second game. I mean, if they come out and say, hey, here's the first game completely rebuilt in the second game's engine, plus a full-on multiplayer open world game, I mean, how can people be upset about that? So yeah, as far as an announcement goes, thankfully the clock is ticking a little bit in 2022. Like, the months are moving along. We're almost in May already, which is crazy. Sony is running out of time to announce this. I have a good feeling that Summer Games Fest is where we'll see it. They love letting Jeff Keighley announce something big during these events, like Death Stranding Director's Cut, and I think it'd be cool if we saw The Last of Us Director's Cut, this new PS5 version, shown off during his event, especially knowing that E3 is canceled this year. And the last story I have for you guys today isn't so much a news story, but more a plea to Sony. So the DualSense is a great controller. I've actually been using it as much as I can on PC. You run into a few issues, but once you get around them, it is a great controller. I mean, games like Ghostwire Tokyo look and run great on PC, and they're even better when you're using the DualSense. But on the Microsoft side of the fence, they have this thing that I really want Sony to make because I feel like Sony could just do it so much better, and that is the Xbox Elite controller. Now, they've been making this for a long time. You've definitely heard about it at this point. You've seen it. They're already on the second iteration of it. But the thing that kind of got me thinking about Sony potentially making a Pro DualSense, or an Elite DualSense, if you will, is the fact that Microsoft is allegedly working on a version 3 of this Elite controller. And that says to me that there's a market for this controller even at its high price of over $200. And if I'm Sony and I'm seeing that, I'm sitting there saying, why am I not making a Pro controller of my own? Now, they got kind of close towards the end of the PS4 generation with that back paddle attachment for the DualShock 4, and they went way harder on that thing than they had to. The actual paddles felt great. The clip felt really sturdy and like it was actually part of the controller. The little screen on the back looked great. You can map any button you wanted to those paddles. And then when the DualSense came out, they were like, yeah, that was a cool experiment. We're never going to mention it again. I think it would be cool if they came out with a version of that back paddle attachment that works with the DualSense controller. But at the end of the day, what I really want to see is a premium version of the DualSense. I'm talking stuff like sturdier triggers, replaceable analog sticks, maybe a different, more textured material for the actual controller itself. Just make it more premium and more sturdy, and of course have removable back paddles, because that's one of the best features on the Xbox Elite Controller V2. When the whole package of Destiny 2 was on Game Pass, I got to admit that that deal was a little too good to pass up, and that was really my main console for Destiny. But as soon as Bungie took that off of Game Pass and PlayStation bought Bungie, I bought the whole collection of all the stuff I needed on PlayStation, and it is just so much more fun and so much better with the DualSense controller. But the one thing I'm missing is that I map jump and reload to those back paddles on the Elite controller, and I just want that same experience on the PS5 with the DualSense. Oh, and one feature they really have to add is an expanded battery. Even if if you turn the light down, you make sure it turns off after around 5 or 10 minutes, the battery on the DualSense is not good enough. It is just plain bad. Like, I don't know how, but somehow Sony made the battery life worse from the DualShock 4 to the DualShock 5. I bet it comes down to the haptics and the adaptive triggers, but they should have compensated for that with a bigger battery. There's really no excuse. But yeah, those are some of the features I'd like to see on a Pro DualSense, and I have a good feeling that when the PS5 Slim and PS5 Pro are announced, we're gonna see a Pro controller to go along with them.